Price of rent, the direction of rent is super important for pretty much everyone. It has gone up double digits and faster than pretty much any other time in history. 10%, 11%, 12%. Interest rates started to rise over the last year. Things got really unaffordable in the housing market and demand is softening. In the first quarter of 2023, we have seen housing prices continue the correctionary path that we've seen since the second half of 2022. For the first time in more than 11 years, home prices have declined year over year. If the housing market has gone into a correction, is rents following suit? Are they going down or flattening out, or are they continuing to rise like they have over the last couple of years? So today, what I'm going to do is dive into two data sets. I'm going to look at residential rent, which is basically rents for buildings that are 4 units and under. And I'm also going to look at commercial rents and vacancy. Again, those are buildings that are 5 units and up. We're going to first look at residential rents. And again, the distinction between residential and commercial is at 4 units. Let's just take a look here at the national median asking rent. And when I show you these rents, what's going on here is the asking price. I don't actually know for certain what gets signed on a lease, but I can tell you what landlords are asking for. And as you can see, the rent price for residential properties has actually really flattened off. If we look at this data, you can see that starting at the beginning of the pandemic, things really went up rapidly throughout 2021. It was pretty common to see double-digit rent growth nationally. We saw 10%, 11%, 12%. Then, as it normally does, it flattens out over the winter. And in 2022, we saw a very similar pattern of growth over the course of the summer. Those two things combined have led rent in most markets in the country to go up more than 20 or even 30% from where they were pre-pandemic lows. Now, what you can see has happened over the last couple of months is it's flattened out mostly, and in some months it's actually declined. And this isn't super surprising because this, in normal times, in the last few years were not normal times, but in normal times, rent prices do fall seasonally over the winter. So it's not really surprising to see that rents went down in November, December, even January over the last couple of months. But as you can see here, the data that we have for March so far shows that it has started to go back up. And again, this is a normal seasonal pattern. I personally am very curious to see if this extends into another rapid rent appreciation like we've seen from this first pattern here in 2021 and then in 22. But we'll just have to wait and see. But I personally believe that it's probably going to slow down a bit more. The main reason I think it's going to slow down is because look at this chart that we see here below. This is basically this chart is based on the same data. It's the same national median asking rent. But what it shows is year over year change. So it basically is comparing the data from 1 month in 2023 to the same month in 2022. So for this most recent data, which I'm going to circle here, it shows basically March of 23 compared to March of 22. And we have, if you can't read that, that's about 6%. And that's high. That is way higher than rent normally grows. In normal years, it's somewhere between 2 and 4%. But as you can see, over the pandemic years, we were reaching 15 or 16% regularly year over year. And this has really started to decline. And so now we're seeing rent growth at about 6%. And if you look backwards at some of the data here before the pandemic, you can see that rents, in 2019, we're somewhere around, let's say, 4.5%. And so I think that rents are probably going to come down to about that level at the highest. And I do think they might be even coming down a little bit more. Just because, and this is my opinion, this is not like data here. This is just my opinion. I think it's become too unaffordable. And I think that a lot of the rent growth that we saw over the last 2 years is somewhat of something called a pull forward, where it's basically normally you see 3 or 4% rent growth. I think we've taken some of the rent growth from future years and pulled it into those 2021, 2022 years, and that we might have some slowdown in rent growth over the next couple of years. I'm not sure, but that's sort of how I feel. Just wanted to also show you, just to give you full details about what's going on, how the national asking rent is changing by bedroom count. And you can see that basically, no matter what you're looking at, is it 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom, all of them were going up very consistently and following similar patterns. The only exception here, and this is not really a trend because it's just the last month, is but if you look at 4 bedrooms here, you can see that it's the only bedroom count that did not see a spike in March. And this is consistent in something that we're going to talk about in the commercial properties, that bigger and more luxurious properties are seeing more slowdowns in rent than smaller, more affordable properties. So I don't know if this is a trend. 1 month does not make a trend, but it's something that I'm going to keep an eye on and maybe you want to see. But I think the significant thing here is just look at this chart. Back in 2016, that was 7 years ago, the median price on a one bedroom was just about $1,000. Now, when we fast forward to 7 years later, it's gone up 50%. It's about $1,500. That's a remarkable change. And I think that is basically just reaching a point of unaffordability. We did a show on my podcast on the market recently where we had some economists on talking about how the United States is now quote unquote rent burdened for the first time, which means that the average renter is paying more than 30% of their income on shelter costs. And to me, that is a sign that rent growth needs to slow down. And that's why I'm saying that I expect it to. Of course, the data that I've shown you so far is on a national level, but every market is going to perform differently. So what I did, and obviously this isn't every market, but I wanted to pull some data for you so you could see which markets are still growing really quickly and which are maybe slowing down the most. And as you can see, 3 cities in Texas are leading the way in terms of rent growth. Lubbock, Texas, in terms of year-over-year growth, still at 30%. It's unbelievable. That is not something you should see. Even over a decade, rent rarely grows 30%. And in Lubbock, Texas, it grew 30% in a single year. In El Paso, Texas, it went up 28%. Then it drops down Laredo to 20%. But as you can see, there's still about 15 markets here that have 10% or higher year-over-year growth, which is very, very unusual in pre-pandemic times. So I do expect these to come down, but as you can see, we're still seeing really high rents in certain markets. On the other side, a lot of cities are seeing rents start to decline. So when we come down here, we can see that Detroit is leading the way and has actually seen an 8% year-over-year decline in rent. Gilbert, Arizona is about 5.2%. Winston-Salem, which is one of the biggest boom towns during the pandemic, Winston-Salem, rents have dropped 5%. Mesa, so we're seeing a lot in Arizona, Phoenix, Chandler, Mesa, Gilbert, a lot in California, Long Beach, Riverside are also dropping. St. Paul and Minneapolis, which instituted rent control this year, are both seeing rent go down. So we're seeing this in a lot of major metro areas, and I do, as I've said, expect that more will follow suit. But overall, rent, just in general, just so you know, is a lot stickier traditionally than housing prices. So as an example, even during the Great Recession, when housing prices dropped about 20% from peak to trough, rent prices only went down about 4 or 5%. And so while there are some markets that are certainly correcting here, I think on a national basis, it is still up and it is likely to get closer to flat. Maybe it will go down a little bit, but I don't think we're going to see rents decline at the same pace that housing does, because historically, that's not what happens. I also want to talk about commercial rent. And again, these are larger multifamily properties. The main thing that you see here when you look at commercial rents is that in absolute terms, rent actually went down in the second half of 2022. It had peaked somewhere around $1,650 and then dropped just a little bit down to $1,625. But that is significant because normally that doesn't really happen. There are some seasonal trends, but it doesn't fall as much as it did. But as you can see, it still had year-over-year growth. And as you'll see, is the theme of most of the things I talk about on this channel, year-over-year is the thing that we really care about. Now, what you see here too, and one of the cool things about CoStar is that they offer a forecast. And what you can see here is that they are forecasting that rent growth is going to go down for multifamily pretty considerably. So if you look at these orange bars here, you can see that they're forecasting that rent prices for multifamily are going to go down below 2%, which is well below inflation right now, and well below the target rate of inflation. And so this is important because that means rent is likely going to lose value against the dollar over the next couple of years, at least for commercial properties. When you look at it by bedroom, the story is pretty similar than commercial. They're all going up in a pretty similar way, so there's not really that much to share there, but I did want to show you what we have here and show you that too a bit. The other thing here that I should mention is that in these large multifamily properties, rents are cheaper. So you can see, and that sort of makes sense, single family homes, duplexes are a little bit more desirable. There's more demand for them than large multifamily units, at least from tenants. And so that you'll see that a single family rent here is just about $1,450, which is a little bit below single family homes. Now, I personally think when I look at this CoStar forecast, I think it's solid, but I actually think there's some more downside risk in commercial rents than is being presented here. And that comes from the quantity of construction that is going on right now. This next chart that I'll show you is deliveries. This orange bars show you basically how many multifamily units are going to be built in the US over the next couple of years. And, normally I do a lot of forecasting and predictions on this show and on this channel, but forecasting is really hard. But forecasting deliveries for construction is actually quite easy because they have to apply for permits and you know exactly what kind of buildings are already in the works. And so what you can see here is that the deliveries of multifamily units are going to be at an all-time high in 2023 and are likely going to stay relatively high. It might not be all-time high, but it's looking like they're going to be relatively high into 2024, which means that even though prices are starting to flatten out and we're seeing some softness, we're likely going to see a very large influx of supply into the market. And as you probably know about supply and demand, when there is an influx of supply, that puts downward pressure on prices. Now, of course, if there's an increase in demand that corresponds with that supply, it might not necessarily set rents down, but there is some evidence that household formation, basically total demand for housing units, is starting to slow down. And personally, I think that's wise and likely given a recession that is potentially on the horizon. And so I think that the commercial space in terms of rent is going to face some significant headwinds. We're probably going to see a significant slowing of rent, if not flattening or even negative in the commercial space. Obviously, we don't know yet, but that's just my read of the situation. Of course, similar to residential, we also have, variance by market in the commercial space. And I'll just show you some of the fastest growing places. Someone in Great Falls, Montana is growing the fastest, never heard of it, but it is growing at 10% per year. And so you can see even the fastest growing rent places in commercial are a lot slower. In commercial, we have 10% as the highest, but it was nearly 30% in residential. It drops down pretty quickly, and you can see Brunswick, Georgia at 5.5%. And these are the top. So after you get out of, let's say the top 10, when we get to this like Midland, Texas, Roanoke, Virginia, Panama City, Florida area, we're still in the 3% growth rate year over year, which is normal times. And so I think for the most part, commercial rents have returned to a normal area. This is what you were expected to see. And I think given the economic climate, that's why I think it could decline further. There are some markets that are also already declining. You could see Lewiston and Auburn, Maine, which have gone down about 9% year over year. We're also seeing in Cheyenne, it's down 5%, Punta Gorda, Florida, 3%, Logan, Utah, 2.6%. And so, yes, again, there are markets that are going down, but it's a little less dramatic on both sides than in the residential market. Some markets are still growing, but they're growing less than the top growing markets for residential. Some commercial markets are declining, but they're declining less than the ones in residential. So it's just a little bit less polarized than the residential market. I'm very curious to hear from all of you if you like this type of video where I sort of gather together all of the data from a single quarter and present sort of like this unified report about what's going on with rent. If you like it, hate it, have any questions, make sure to put a comment below. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, or you can always find me on my Instagram account where I'm at the data. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you again next week.